All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to Everything College Football Podcast. Dave, me, and Nick here. We're doing our preview and prediction for number 3 Alabama versus number 6 Tennessee. Probably the biggest matchup of the college football season thus far. 7.5 point line in favor of the Tide. 65.5 is the over/under. CBS will be airing this contest 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Neyland Stadium in Knoxville. Series history: Bama leads all time 58-38-7, and they've won 15 straight. Looking at this Alabama offense, Nick, Bryce Young. Obviously, he's missed the last game and a half. They certainly have struggled. They've definitely missed him. Arkansas was climbing back into that game until the Tide had a big fourth quarter. Milroe's legs added a different dimension to this offense and allowed Jahmyr Gibbs to spring a pair of 70-yard runs to close out that Arkansas game. Texas A&M, they didn't have much of a passing attack. They did have a handful of notable plays through the air. But again, it was mainly about the ground and pound because Jahmyr Gibbs averaged over 7 yards per carry. Milroe had some good plays running the football, but he fumbled twice. McClellan, he had a fumble as well. 17 of A&M's 20 points were off of turnovers. So I think that game's very skewed if you just look at the final score. This Alabama offense, the bookies seem to still be respecting it with a 7.5 point line. Bryce Young, though, we expect him to be back. He had an AC joint shoulder sprain. 14 touchdowns, 3 picks this year, 1,200 yards. One thing I said leading into the Arkansas game is he's going to have a field day against that secondary again, much like he did last year. 173 yards on 7 completions. He had a long touchdown as well. And, he got picked off on a play that should have been called for a flag. It was that one interception. But he was well on his way to having a complete field day against Arkansas yet again. They're facing a very similar secondary here in Tennessee. What's the key to this game for Alabama is they're, like I said, playing a very poor secondary. But this passing attack at times has really struggled, mainly the Texas game. And, of course, against the Aggies, they were not very efficient through the air.
We didn't expect much out of the passing game against Texas A&M on Saturday. I think that makes a lot of sense. Jalen Milroe adds that dynamic on the ground. But he's certainly more of a carrying back than a throwing back, and I think that he did his job. The fumbles obviously were a little bit disappointing from him, but I also give credit to Texas A&M defense because they forced a lot of those fumbles. A lot of hard hits from that front seven, very strong, very talented front seven that Alabama faced on Saturday night. But for me, the key on Saturday against Tennessee is Bryce Young going to play? Can he play and pick apart that secondary? This Tennessee secondary is not very good. They've gotten beaten over the air in a couple games so far this season, and this is a real opportunity for Bryce to kind of air it out, break free. Hopefully some of his wide receivers can break free and make some strong plays. I'm looking at Tyler Harrell. Hopefully he's healthy and able to play and get some action. Trayshawn Holden as well. He's leading the team in receptions and yards so far this season with 18 catches for 223 yards. He's going to need to have a big day. He's got 4 touchdowns on the season as well. I'd like to see Holden get a lot of targets, especially if Bryce is the one slinging the ball.
Jahmyr Gibbs, 532 yards, 2 scores on the ground this year, 220 yards and 3 receiving touchdowns through the air. He's that dual threat back we had envisioned. He's he's well on his way to being a phenomenal producer for this football team. Last 2 weeks they've really uncorked him, and it's really did wonders for this rushing attack, turning into their best performances of the year against 2 of the best opponents I'd say they faced this year. 317 yards on the ground against Arkansas, 288 against the Aggies. This is a football team that's really starting to move the pile up front. Obviously having Milroe's legs, that dimension's really going to help out. This is still a talented group of backs. When McClellan's not fumbling, he ripped off a 70-yarder against Texas. That was the only noteworthy play they had on the ground there. Ordell Williams, Trey Sanders get involved. Senior-led offensive line, though, they're starting to progress, it seems like. Emil Ekiyor, Darian Dalcourt, some veterans there on the interior. Tyler Steen, I think, he's starting to come into his own a little bit at left tackle. Offensive line is clearly miles ahead of where they were last year at this point in the season, Nick, I would say. Like you said, Trayshawn Holden's going to have a big game. Ja'Cory Brooks. Jermaine Burton has yet to showcase that vertical speed, but I think that's something they could really bring to the table here. Kobe Pratis, I think he was the one who had that big touchdown against Arkansas, and then Camelot too as well. We were only 11 receptions on the year, so they're deep as it comes. Isaiah Bond is a player they really like. Overall, this offense, they're going to be clicking, I think, when Bryce Young, if he plays in this game. Now, obviously, they didn't look great against Texas in week 2. A lot of 3 and outs. They were unable to run the ball. They couldn't get much going vertically. But I think that this is a game that they're really going to be able to expose their opponent, kind of like they were doing against Arkansas. What are your final thoughts on this offense? We're going to assume that Bryce Young will be playing in this game.
Well, the offense did not look great against Texas. I think you've hit the nail on the head there with the offensive line has improved. They seem to improve every week they get out there together. The more they play together, the better they get. Really impressive Steen. He looked poor the week 1 against Utah State. Didn't look great against Texas either, but he's really come to his own. He continues to develop as a pass blocker. Really talented to see what he can continue to do. And then I look at the rest of this offense. There's a lot of guys here that have a couple catches here and there. The wealth has certainly been spread out so far this season. But I'd like to see Brooks and Holden step up and take that huge leap forward this next game against Tennessee. As long as Bryce Young plays, I think Alabama will be fine on offense. I'd like to see them air it out a little bit more, try to challenge that secondary that seems to be struggling at times.
Now looking at a Tennessee offense that is going to lead the way, or it's not going to lead the way. That's this entire football team's identity. Josh Heupel comes over and he's did great work, not just with Hendon Hooker, but the entire program this far. They lead the nation in total offense, 548 yards per game, second with over 46 points per contest. This offense has been ridiculous, Nick. They put up almost 600 against Florida, and they really let their foot off the gas, it seemed, in that one towards the end. 500 plus against LSU, a really good defense. And they've had great balance. If you look at their game logs, phenomenal balance all year long, other than that Pittsburgh game where they faced a phenomenal offensive line, or a defensive line rather, entering conference play. So far, they've been pretty good. And they're not facing, like a Ball State defense like they did in week one. They're playing SEC opponents, and they're putting it on them on the ground and through the air. Look at Hendon Hooker. His maturity is probably going to be the reason why they win this game if they do. 70% completion rate, 1,400 yards, 10 touchdowns, got another 3 on the ground, 0 interceptions. He's just so smart with the football, runs this offense to perfection. And, of course, it's going to start with the ground game because they want to move fast. I think it's, what do they run, like 3 plays per minute or something like that over the last 2 years is their average. Jalen Wright and Jabari Small, phenomenal running back duo, 300-plus yards for each of those guys, combined 10 touchdowns. Biggest storyline to watch, though, this offense is will Cedric Tillman play. He had a big day against Pittsburgh. He got hurt there. In that Akron game, 9 grabs, 162 yards, and a score against Pittsburgh in a game that went to overtime. His services were obviously tremendous. This is a guy at 6'3", 215, plays taller than his size. He's very physical. He can win downfield. And they've been fine without him. Brew McCoy's really stepped up. 20 grabs, 251 yards on the year, 388, 5 touchdowns for Jalen Hyatt. He also leads the team with 27 receptions. Other than that, that's about it for this receiving core. Ramel Kighton, though, he does have 10 grabs for 202 yards. That's a pretty good average. That's it, though. You only got about 2 or 3 guys that are noteworthy names here that are going to make big impacts. Tillman's being one of them. Again, I anticipate him playing as well. We hope to see both these teams fully healthy. One of the things with Tennessee, though, is their offensive line was just terrible last year. Right now, they're off to a great start. They lead the nation in fewest tackles for losses allowed. I'd say they're a little bit better than the Tide right now at this moment in time. You got guys like Cooper Mays, Jerome Calvin, Darnell Wright. He's been around a handful of years. Gerald Mincy, he's a younger guy at left tackle. They're really gelling together, it seems like, up front. Nick, what's the key here for this offense to thrive against Alabama? Because I think they might have an edge against these corners. It's an offense that likes to move fast. They like to get it on the perimeter. And, of course, the running game, though, it's a very underrated part of this offense. That's a big reason why they're able to move so fast and why Hooker's able to be so efficient. Because when they can read between the tackles, very tough to slow these guys down.
The variety with this offense is ridiculous. You look at Wright and Small, who both have over 300 yards on the ground this season. Both have they're combined for 10 total touchdowns. They each have about 66 attempts. The way that they can run the ball, Hendon Hooker as well. He is that true dual threat quarterback that Tennessee has been looking for quite some time. 44 carries on the ground, 231 yards. 5.1 yards per carry for him. And then we look at the wide receiving core, it really is down to Hyatt and McCoy so far with Tillman being out, but the two of them have really stepped up to the plate. Hyatt has 27 receptions for 388 yards, leading the team, 5 touchdowns for him. I love to see him continue to get targets as well. Brew McCoy is another guy that I think he can continue to get better as the season goes on. He has 20 receptions so far. They could target him a little bit more on Saturday. I think they'll have a lot of success if Tillman is not playing. I assume Tillman will be playing. If he does play, as that extra vertical, sort of piece that they could use on this offense. The offensive line's been great. These backs right and small have built, hit the holes, ground and pound on the ground. I think the variety in this offense is fantastic. The tempo is second to none, and I think that's the reason why the Tennessee team is playing so well to start this season.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. There's not much to say about the Tennessee offense. They're phenomenal. And like you said, the variety is pretty insane. We hope Tillman is back. Looking at the Alabama defense, it's going to be tasked with slowing these guys down. 12.4 points per game allowed, 250.8 yards per game allowed so far. This is a defense that, certainly has given up some plays in that second half when momentum changed against Arkansas. Against A&M, I'd say for the most part, they were pretty good. They did give up 253 yards, but there was a lot of pressure being put on Haynes King. I think this pass rush is really starting to find its grasp. Against the run, though, they've been pretty good. Again, Arkansas 187. A lot of that came in that second half, though. I think this run defense is really good. You look at the game against Texas where Bijan Robinson, nothing was there. It seemed, at least on the stat sheet, you didn't see a whole lot, but these guys were right there to prevent, 1 or only 2-yard pickup. I like what Byron Young's doing. Jaheim Otis is getting on the field. DJ Dale, senior-led defensive line. They don't have that dominance like they used to on the interior, but it's still very capable football players to get the job done. Will Anderson, 10 tackles for loss already in 6 games. Looks like he might be on pace to, hit the numbers he did last year. He's got 5 sacks as well. He's just a force. Phenomenal first step. I really want to see how these tackles do because they're not going to face a challenge like this all season long. Dallas Turner, 4.5 tackles for loss. Jalen Moody is an interior pass rusher. He's been very good as well. I'm glad he stuck around. I believe he's one of the top tacklers on this team as well, third with 33 stops. Henry Kyoto, 39 tackles. This is a very veteran-led defense in all facets, but they've certainly had some of their struggles, like late in that A&M game. They're giving up a drive. They're giving up plays downfield and whatnot. They almost cost them the game. They had a big stop there. As time expired. The biggest thing though is how will the secondary perform, because I do like their ability to slow down the run, but making plays on the perimeter. That's a big thing against Tennessee. Stopping those quick screens, not getting beat one-on-one. And these corners have certainly struggled. Xavier Worthy, they were playing man-to-man coverage on him for whatever reason. It just wasn't going great. Terrion Arnold made some plays for them. I don't know if man coverage is going to be the way to go in this game, but I do think that if they play a lot of zone, they can certainly get carved up. But I like these safeties. I don't think they're going to get beat over top too much. Brian Branch having a very respectable season. DeMarco Helms is playing much better than he did last year. Overall, Nick, this is a very good defense. And, top to bottom, I think they're well equipped to slow this down. But guys like Kool-Aid McKinstry and Terrion Arnold and maybe even Kyrie Jackson have to be great on the outside, because I think Helms and Jordan battle there at safety. They're going to do their part. If these guys outside are getting beat, could be a long day for the Crimson Tide defense. I've
been very impressed with the defense so far from Alabama. Only giving up 84.5 yards and rushing allowed per game, and then 166.3 yards per game allowed through the air. Solid numbers from this defense. Very impressed with that. Henry Toto has been leading the line. We expected to see that out of him so far this year. 39 total tackles plus a sack for him. DeMarco Helms has really stepped up. Player I was not a fan of last year, made a lot of mistakes in A&M, lost last year, but he's really kind of stepped up and really got that leadership role. 37 tackles for him. I think Terrion Arnold, a lot of people are saying that he got beat a few times against A&M, but they certainly targeted him a whole lot. He was the most targeted defensive back on Saturday night. He did have that interception late in the first half and also had the breakup to end the game there. People argue that might have been pass interference. No call there, so the play stands. I like the way Arnold's getting better and better every week. 27 total tackles for him so far this year, 4 pass breakups plus the interception. Like to see him have a good day as long as he doesn't get beat there. There's a lot to like about him. And then Will Anderson, of course, is a wrecking ball. 5 total sacks this year, 29 total tackles. He got after Hayes King a lot. King was able to get out and kind of roll out. It blew my mind how King was able to release the ball and escape what seemed to be like 10 certain sacks at that point. Alabama got so much pressure on him. He was constantly running for his life and just slinging the ball away. It blew my mind he was able to do that. If they can get that pressure on Hendon Hooker and force him to run the ball, I think this will be a recipe for success for Alabama.
Chris Braswell had a nice play off the edge as well, forced a pick there. I think it was somewhere right before the first half ended. But, Tennessee, they're going to spread you out. It's going to be up to this front 7 to make plays against the run, because that's what they like to do. They, kind of like Art Briles, Baylor style. They spread you all the way out, and they're going to run on the interior. It's going to be up to your guys against their guys. So I think that's really where the key is for this defense. I think the corners could be a long day. They're going to have to get off the blocks. They're going to have to be great downfield. This complex offense is kind of, making me nervous if I was an Alabama fan, just because the corners right now have not been very good. But I think overall, this defense is going to be set up for success. You look at a Tennessee defense that's given up 18 points per contest. The linebackers, has been a big topic of this football team, because Aaron Beasley has really been phenomenal. Jeremy Banks last year, of course, was a superstar for them. 35 tackles, 2.5 TFL for Aaron Beasley. This is a really interesting group, Nick, because the secondary, they're just not very good. They gave up, 450 yards to Florida, and we both said that we didn't think that offense was well equipped to throw from behind. Well, the game wasn't even, these weren't garbage time yards at all. This was a 4-quarter thrashing of this defensive secondary, because Anthony Richardson, at one point, they were, I believe Florida was leading in that first half of that game. What the hell is that?
I don't know why some random ad started playing. Sorry.
That's why I put my mute on. Yeah,
I had mine on, but I don't know what the fuck happened. Sorry.
Because Anthony Richardson, play action, he was abusing the middle of the field. They're throwing it all over the place against Florida. 24 completions for 453 yards was what they allowed. That was very interesting to see. Again, those were not garbage time yards any means. LSU did complete 70%, 300 yards. They were very good in the red zone. Only 13 points allowed. LSU made some pretty interesting calls in that game that, set Tennessee up for success. But, a lot of those were garbage time yards as well. But overall, this secondary, they've allowed 1,500 yards so far this year. They've not been good against anybody. 62% opponent completion rate. That's encouraging. But, now Warren Burrell is out for the season. One thing about LSU is they haven't really attacked downfield much this year either. They've just been really scared to air it out, it seems, which is strange because they have a very talented receiving corps. But I'd say overall they held up very well despite the yardage total. But the biggest thing is they had 9 TFL in that game. I kind of figured they would have an edge against that offensive line, and they certainly did. A lot of guys like Byron Young and Tyler Barron to step up. They're going to be key in this game. They had 5 sacks against LSU. I do think those 2 edge rushers along with 2 linebackers we are going to outline, those guys are going to be the key. I do not expect the secondary to play very well unless they can get some pressure on Bryce Young, which even then that could certainly be devastating for your defense. So it's very tough to assume what's going to happen here. I do think, though, Alabama, they're going to protect pretty well, and I think they're going to have a field day against this passing defense. But the biggest question is, can they force turnovers, and can they get off the field in the red zone? That's just something you're going to have to wait till Saturday to see. What do you expect from this Volunteer defense on Saturday?
I certainly think the key to the game is looking at the stats. Alabama's given up 166.3 yards per game passing. Tennessee's given up 307.4. That is a ridiculous number, a little under double the amount that Alabama has given up. That just really sets the story for me here. The secondary has not been good for Tennessee. They really continue to get torched week in, week out. We talked about Florida. They should not have had the day they had. That Florida passing offense just really is not there this season. Anthony Richardson really has not been able to throw the ball, and yet they absolutely torched Tennessee. I am impressed with the linebackers. Jeremy Banks hasn't really even hit his full stride yet with 23 total tackles. I expect more out of him. I think he'll continue to improve as the season goes on. Aaron Beasley with 35 tackles, leading the team, having a strong season top to bottom. Trayvon Flowers, 26 total tackles for him, plus a sack as well. Byron Young, 3.5 sacks, plus the 14 total tackles. This front seven is very, very strong, very talented. They continue to get after the quarterback, but as long as Alabama can hold up with its offensive line and give Bryce the time he needs to throw the ball, I think Alabama will be just fine on Saturday, considering the secondary will have trouble keeping up with these speedy wide receivers that Alabama possesses.
Now, Tennessee did perform pretty well this year against the run. They gave 141 exactly to Pittsburgh and Florida. The Pittsburgh game, though, Abanikanda, he had a long touchdown run of like 76 yards on that first drive. After that, I thought they were pretty good against the run. That's going to be a key. I've been pretty impressed by guys like Omari Thomas to step up. Kurt Garland as well. This defensive line, I was interested to see how they play this year. I think they're certainly getting good help out of the rotation. Guys like Elijah Simmons. It's going to be a different task here, even though that Florida offensive line is a pretty good one. But they still, they had a field day through the air, so they didn't really have to lean on the run too much. It's going to be a very interesting game for this defense. They rank 128th in pass defense, 127th is Arkansas's. Bryce Young was carving them up. Tennessee, though, the team's been throwing the ball a lot. Second most passing attempts per game, almost 45 by the opponent. So they're certainly well aware of how poor this secondary is. So I think they're going to have a struggle full day. But if they can stop the run, then it'll be interesting to see what they can do in the back end, lay off a little bit. Looking at team comparisons, quarterback, I absolutely love Hendon Hooker, his maturity. If he wins this game, he's going to be at the front of the Heisman race, no doubt. But I think Bryce Young still has the edge there. Still, we're going to assume he will be playing in this contest. And if he's not, then clear edge for Tennessee at quarterback. Running back and wide receiver, I think for Bama, they're going to get the edge there as well. They're much deeper at wide receiver. Cedric Tillman's obviously one of the nation's best, but there's only, like I said, him, Hyatt, McCoy. Those are only the 3 guys that really get involved. Running back, I love the duo of Small and Wright, but I think Alabama, Jahmyr Gibbs is much better as an all-around player than both of those guys. Jace McClellan, he's plenty capable. Overall, very deep backfield. I'm going to give Tennessee the edge on the offensive line. I think Alabama's making some good strides, but so far, Tennessee, like I said, first nationally in fewest tackles for loss allowed. It's an impressive number considering they were like 122nd in that number last year. Looking at the defensive part of these teams, defensive line, we give it to Bama there. I do love the edge rushers for Tennessee, but Alabama, their outside linebackers are phenomenal. But when I give Tennessee the edge at linebacker, I'm really talking about the inside linebackers. So Aaron Beasley, Jeremy Banks, Juwan Mitchell, he's a senior as well. So I'm going to give them the edge there, even though it's really up for debate. I think there's no debate when it comes to the secondary. How do you feel about these, Nick? Which one that really stands out, and which one do you maybe disagree with?
I agree with you on these. I think, running back, you certainly can make a case for the 2 backs that Tennessee have, because they both really have had strong seasons so far. Wright and Small, I think together they're very strong, but just looking at Gibbs overall, the amount of threat he allows in the passing game gives Alabama the edge in the running back department for me. I also think the linebacking clearly is advantage to Tennessee here. I just think that Banks and Beasley together are such a great pair, and they really do dominate that on that defensive side of the ball. I think this is a solid list of comparisons, and I think currently I would agree with you on these.
Looking at the final thoughts and the prediction on this game, Nick is an Alabama fan, so we'll not be making a prediction. Give me one key to this contest.
As someone who knows Alabama inside and out, I think the key is just Bryce Young being comfortable in the pocket and being able to sling the ball out, beating the secondary deep downfield, getting his wide receivers involved early, breaking play for massive yardage, big breakout plays on the left and right side of the field.
Yeah, for me, protect the football. 17 of the 20 points you allowed last week to Texas A&M were off of turnovers. Obviously, now that you have your starter back, we presume that should be much different. But I also think another one, make tackles on the perimeter. Like I said, those corners, they might be battle-tested all day long. That's one thing you got to do, though. is make those tackles. And, of course, slowing down the run, I think, is just as important. But, slowing down those screens and pick up about 4 or 5 yards, I mean, even a 3-yard gain, that's where that offense wants to be. Keep them off schedule, fight through tackles, or, fight through blocks, that is. Don't get beat too bad. I think they'll be just fine if those corners can settle down and play good ball. If you're Tennessee, get the run game going, spread them out. If you can start running about 4 or 5 yards per carry, it's going to be a long day for any defense. And don't let the moment be too big. Biggest game in Tennessee football history in a long time. And a win here would put them number 1 in the AP poll. If it doesn't, well, that'd be ridiculous. But this is a big-time game. It really sets them up to win a championship. They still have Georgia left on the docket, but Tennessee, the whole world will be talking about it if they win this game. Very big for Josh Heupel. A lot different than, being at UCF a couple of years ago. So I think this is going to be a great game, Nick. Alabama 118th in turnover margin, so protect the football. If you don't want to give Tennessee, great field position. That's one thing LSU did. They were able to, fend off pretty well in the red zone, but that's not really going to happen all the time. They can easily score touchdowns, no problem, especially if you give them the opportunities. Bama for me, 35-28. I think this will be a great game. I think a lot of people are still kind of underrating this Alabama team. I think they're really letting last week's game get to them, where they've played very well. The defense was phenomenal. Again, a lot of those points were because of a poor offensive ability to protect the football with backup quarterback Jalen Milroe in his first career start. So I think Bryce Young is going to have a field day against his secondary, Hendon Hooker. His maturity, he'll keep him in this game. But I do think Alabama, they could certainly perform much better than people expect on defense. Would not be shocked one bit if they slow down this UT offense. But I do think they'll have some struggles on the outside. The key to the game for me was, of course, make plays on the perimeter. I don't think they'll be able to do that consistently. So I think Tennessee, they're going to, their tempos are certainly going to let them find the end zone a handful of times. So again, 35-28 for me, Nick. This should be a great game. Again, I appreciate you joining me.
Yeah, I'm excited for this game. This is a rivalry game, a rivalry that really matters a lot to me and a lot of other Alabama fans. We take this rivalry very seriously, even though it has been very lopsided in the last 15 years or so. But considering that this is in Knoxville, it's going to be allowed in Neyland. It's been weird. The series the last couple of years, the last 2 games in Tuscaloosa, Tennessee actually played Alabama pretty well. It took Alabama 2 big fourth quarters to pull away. So I certainly expect them to hang in very long. This is going to be a tight game, going to come down to the wire. Very excited for this rivalry to have this kind of excitement and juice around it for the first time. And honestly, in a very long time that I can remember, this rivalry being very hyped. This is a huge game, very important. And I cannot wait to see who comes out on top on Saturday.
Yeah, it's going to be a phenomenal contest. Can't wait for this one to go down. Big time matchup in the SEC. It's going to be it for today's episode. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.